Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the death toll rises from Superstorm Sandy, and San Diegans head east to help with the recovery.
And for the second day in a row, Superstorm Sandy grounded thousands of flights and shut down Wall Street and federal offices in D.C. Coming up, how the fiscal fallout could impact San Diego. Plus, we take a nonpartisan look at the Government Performance and Accountability Act, also known as Prop 31. I'm Peggy Pico with those stories just ahead.
Mayoral candidate Bob Filner receives a new endorsement and takes aim at claims he's demeaning to women. And the number of homeless veterans needing help in San Diego is increasing. We'll show you how the Veterans Village is expanding to meet the growing need. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Irwin Jacobs and by
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Superstorm Sandy expected to turn toward upper New York State tonight after causing extensive damage along the eastern seaboard. Here's the latest satellite image from the National Hurricane Center. The storm has weakened since last night, but it's still dropping a lot of rain and causing flooding. 48 people were killed in the storm. Hundreds have been rescued from floodwaters. Tomorrow, President Obama will go to New Jersey for a first-hand look at the damage. He's declared major disasters for New Jersey and New York. California's National Guard is helping out. Search and rescue teams have been sent to Virginia and South Carolina, along with helicopters and airplanes. Medical personnel are also being sent. San Diego Gas and Electric is sending about 24 trucks and 45 employees to the storm zone. The equipment is being taken on flatbed trucks. The workers will fly out later this week to help restore power up and down the East Coast. An estimated 8 million people are without power tonight. The outages stretch from Maine to the Carolinas. Estimated property damage will reach $20 billion, and lost business could reach $30 billion. Economists say it'll take weeks or even months to fully assess the financial impact of the storm. Peggy Pico finds out how the fallout from Sandy could impact San Diego.
Financial experts predict that Superstorm Sandy could cost $20 billion in property damage and up to $30 billion in lost business. And though San Diego is nearly 3,000 miles away from Wall Street, the storm's fiscal fallout may be felt on the West Coast for months to come. Here to explain is my guest, Marnie Cox, chief economist at San Diego Association of Government. Marnie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Peggy.
Give us an overview of what sort of economic damages can happen from a disaster like this.
Well, this one's pretty unique in the sense of where it's being hit. It's coming into a major population center. Probably 20% of the total nation's population lives in the area where it's being impacted. So that starts what types of impacts may occur there. Other kinds of problems that may occur besides lots of people living there where the impact's coming in, it's also a major production and distribution center, both not only domestically but also internationally. So now it has global implications. Anytime you begin to shut down an area that's connected to the entire world and depends upon daily, hourly, minute connections, then you disrupt that entire economic process that goes on.
And since we're talking about connections, more than 36 flights from San Diego alone, thousands from across the nation have been canceled because of this storm. What sort of impact does that have on, let's say, Lindbergh Field or other travelers or airlines throughout the nation?
Well, it's part of a transportation system, and anytime you disrupt one part of it, it's taking off and landing. It's supposed to go to some place in the area this impact can no longer go there. So that means the plane stops somewhere. What does it do with its passengers that can't go forward on? A lot of people get stuck in places, and then they end up in airports. That puts a lot of pressure on them. So this has a tendency to build itself out. You get a lot of people then canceling their flight plans. You've got them, they don't know whether or not a week, 2 weeks? How long do I postpone before I just don't go at all?
Does that trickle down to, let's say, hotels here? Or I know some hotels have disaster contingency plans where they'll let travelers stay. Would it in San Diego actually, will we feel that impact here?
You know, it's possible that San Diego's hotel-motel industry wouldn't be all that impacted, right? But when you think about what happened in the area that's impacted on the East Coast, those hotels are certainly going to be impacted, both by the people who either couldn't get out or by the people who couldn't arrive. And so you're stuck with a number of days. And back to your point about the size of the impact, $20 billion in terms of lost opportunities and then another $30 billion to businesses. You think about, we're in about a $50 billion per day economy. That equates to about $16 trillion per year. And so we're talking within a short period of time, say 2-3 days, we're hit by about the same amount, right, that would impact the entire economy on a daily basis. So this is a pretty big impact.
Let's talk about the New York Stock Exchange. It's the first time it was shut down since the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Could a disaster like this be a good reason to bring back the Pacific Stock Exchange?
Well, rather than a location, if you can think of an electronic concept that didn't necessarily depend upon a particular location. Now, that does not spread across all the financial transactions that take place in New York. For example, there are ones where you sell bonds, where you've literally got to go out, find the people who are buying the bonds. Most of them are located in New York. If they're not working, you can no longer sell your bonds. If you can't sell your bonds, that means you got to come back another day. If you come back another day, that means the market's interest rates are different than the ones you originally had thought you'd have. So all of those are costs.
Does that trickle-down effect actually impact businesses in San Diego because they're doing business with
I don't know whether or not there are agencies, organizations, companies that were back in New York with transactions on the table. But these are literally billions of transactions going on each day. So my guess is California is a big enough state, San Diego a piece of that. There probably something has been impacted.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I wanted to get to one myth that sometimes damage to a storm like this or a disaster could actually stimulate economic growth. Is that true?
Yeah, the answer to that is no. If you think about it, those resources that we're spending to repair are ones that are replacing what we could have spent them on, as opposed to replacing what the storm has damaged, is something new that was higher on the priority list that needed to be replaced or updated. So those are really lost opportunities. You got to make sure you invest your money in the right places in order to have sustainable growth.
So not helping in the long run.
No.
All right.
But it still needs to be done. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
The U.S. will come together for that investment that's required back there to put things back together.
Okay. Marnie Cox with Sandy. We're out of time. Thanks so much for talking.
Thank you, Peggy.
Several agencies are taking donations via text message tonight for relief efforts. AT&T Wireless is allowing customers to text a $10 donation to either the Red Cross, Salvation Army, or the Humane Society. The numbers are there on your screen. We've also got the information on our website at kpbs.org. The storm is also having an impact on gas prices. Gas futures fell today because folks are expected to buy less gas. San Diego's average is $4.13 for a gallon of regular. This month, we've seen several reports of rising home prices in San Diego County. Now, a report from Standard & Poor's says it was a nationwide trend. S&P's Case-Shiller Home Index rose 2% in August. It looks at prices in 20 markets across the country. A new report shows a decline in circulation for UT San Diego. It's dropped out of the top 25 newspapers nationwide. The Audit Bureau of Circulations says the paper's Sunday readership is down nearly 5% from last year. 2 weeks ago, UT San Diego owner Doug Manchester said circulation was increasing. The paper's CEO says there's no contradiction. He says readership was declining at a faster rate before Manchester bought the paper, and he believes circulation will surge by this time next year. Congressman Bob Filner fired back today at claims from his opponent in the San Diego mayor's race. Carl DeMaio says Filner lacks the temperament to be mayor and is disrespectful toward women. KPBS Metro reporter Katie Orr joins us from the News Center with the story. How does Filner respond to these claims, Katie?
Well, Dwayne, City Councilman Carl DeMaio has been running ads calling Filner unfit to be mayor and highlighting some of his bad behavior, including an incident with a female TSA agent in 2007. Filner said he's a passionate person, which he says is a benefit when it comes to leadership. At a news conference today promoting his work with veterans, Filner countered the claims that he has issues with women. He introduced Tara Wise, who founded the National Women's Veterans Association of America. She said Filner helped her after she experienced a military sexual assault.
I wanted to die. I did not see a future for me, myself, or my son. Immediately, he reached out. And there's women veterans all around this nation that tell and can share the same story because I refer them to him.
So why is there so much interest in women lately?
Well, several polls have shown Filner drawing more support among likely women voters, but recently the DeMaio campaign has been pushing the message that Filner is demeaning toward women. The tactic was evident yesterday when District Attorney Bonnie Dumanish bashed Filner during her endorsement of DeMaio.
His temperament shows how poor he would be as the city's manager or CEO, which is what the role of mayor is. His behavior is nothing new. I've been in this community for 40 years. I know Bob Filner. I know that he is disruptive, disrespectful, and demeaning, especially to women.
The candidates have their final televised debate tomorrow, so there's a final chance for them to make their case to all potential voters.
And 1 week away from Election Day. KPBS Metro reporter Katie Orr. County supervisors will take a look at campaign finance rules after the election. They've scheduled a public hearing on a plan to drop a contribution limit for political parties. Right now, parties can only give $1,000 to candidates in county races. The proposal would also change the limits on individual contributions. The public hearing is scheduled for December 4th. $350 million has been raised this election season by campaigns for and against California's 11 propositions on the ballot. Prop 32 is attracting some of the biggest donations. It would forbid using paycheck deductions for political purposes. Campaigns on both sides of the issue are expected to spend more than $120 million to sway voters. California has become a key battleground state, not in the presidential race, but for control of Congress. One of the important races is here in San Diego. Haven Daly of the Associated Press has the story.
Democrats are committed to staying in session as long.
The road to the Democrats regaining control of the House of Representatives runs through California. So said Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. The Democrats could pick up as many as a dozen seats in the state, which just went through a redistricting process which many believe favored the Democrats, who need a net gain of 25 seats nationwide to retake the majority. For Republicans, California, a state where the GOP has only about 30% of registered voters, is a chance to keep Democrats in check.
Democrats have absolutely tried to increase their recruiting, particularly in the Central Valley and in the Inland Empire, which are these growing areas of the state, areas where the new districts have been created, and areas where Democrats historically haven't done well.
One of those new Democratic challengers is former astronaut Jose Hernandez, taking on freshman Republican Congressman and military veteran Jeff Denham in Modesto.
Right now we need to get people back to work, and I was able to not only author a bill but do it in a bipartisan level, get unanimous support in both houses to get veterans a skills job act so that they can actually use the credentials from the best training in the world that they received on active duty and actually use that when they get discharged and be able to immediately step into a job.
A lot of people say you don't have the experience. And I said, well, that's good. That means I don't have any special interests that are behind me, pushing me, trying to make me vote one way or the other. I'm going to be voting for what's best for my district, what's best for my state, what's best for my country, in that order. And I'm saying, going to Washington, I like to say it a lot, it's not rocket science.
Another race expected to be close is in the nearby Sacramento suburbs, where 8-term incumbent Republican Dan Lundgren is facing a rematch with Democratic Dr. Ami Bera, who Lundgren beat in the last election.
Nancy Pelosi has done a lot of a lot of fundraising for my opponent. Nancy Pelosi has spoken out for my opponent. So yeah, I think it's a fair thing to say that the people here have an ability to make a decision as to whether they want, frankly, Nancy Pelosi or Nancy Pelosi's proxy to be their representative.
Nobody recruited me to run. We've been here for 20 years. This is a race about the people who live here. If Dan Lungren wants to run against Nancy Pelosi, he should go to San Francisco and run there. This is about representing the people of Sacramento, the people of the 7th Congressional District. And Dan Lungren's failed in doing that, and that's why we're going to win this race in November.
There are also some tight races in Southern California, like San Diego's District 52, where four-term incumbent Republican Brian Bilbray is being challenged by former city councilman Democrat Scott Peters.
Well, if Congress was doing great, I think you should send the same people back. And I think, in particular with our congressman, it's hard to find what benefit San Diego's getting from this.
Mr. Peters is a walking wallet who's trying to buy his way into Washington. And we've got tons of millionaires that have tried to write blank checks to buy their way in.
Voter turnout could play a crucial role in California. Most analysts agree that a high voter turnout here, as in 2008, will benefit Democrats, while lower voter turnout, like we saw in 2010, would help Republicans. Haven Daily, Associated Press.
3 former California governors are urging voters to leave the state's death penalty alone. Republicans Pete Wilson and George Deukmejian joined Democrat Gray Davis for a no vote on Prop 34. It would replace the death penalty with a life sentence and no chance for parole. The governor's call comes a day after a federal court overturned the death sentence for the state's longest-serving inmate on death row. Douglas Stankiewicz was convicted of murdering a woman in Fresno in 1978. An appeals court says his defense lawyer did an inadequate job and ordered a resentencing to life without the possibility of parole unless prosecutors retry the penalty phase of the case. Our election coverage continues with a nonpartisan look at the pros and cons of Proposition 31. Peggy Pico explains how the measure would change the state constitution and its potential impact on local governments.
I caught up with Thad Kauser, political science professor at UC San Diego, in between classes. He agreed to sit down and talk to us for a few minutes about Prop 31, also called the Government Performance and Accountability Act. Thad, one of the big issues, at least it's being touted as a big issue, is the 2-year budget cycle instead of the 1-year budget cycle. Is that a big issue, and what sort of impact would it have on our process?
Well, it would change the way Sacramento works or doesn't work. It would mean that in 1 year, the legislators would all be focusing on writing the budget. The next year, they could concentrate on writing legislation. But it's probably not likely to change what the budget looks like and what comes out. It changes the way Sacramento works, but it's not going to make them spend more or spend less. That's what other parts of this measure are designed to do.
And one of those other parts, the big one, is about requiring the legislatures to identify a funding source before a program over $25 million is implemented, including either tax cuts or spending cuts. Tell us about that provision.
Well, this is called pay-as-you-go. It's the way that Congress operates most of the time. So when the legislature wants to spend money permanently on a new program or expanding existing programs, they'd find the money either by cutting other programs or by raising taxes. When they wanted to give a permanent tax cut, they'd also have to find some way to pay for it. And the idea is, when California's on this fiscal roller coaster, the dot-com boom's coming, we've got lots of money, you could spend it on one-time expenditures, or you could use it to pay down the debt under this initiative. But if you wanted to put it into permanent programs, you couldn't do that without finding a permanent funding source.
Critics say this would create more bureaucracy. Is that true?
Well, I think what it would really do is set program against program, fighting to survive as one program has to gobble up another program. And also, critics say that it would give the state less flexibility. If you're looking out over 10, 20, 30 years, we might have a very different state government serving very different needs. And this ballot box budgeting done through the initiative process wouldn't allow the legislature the flexibility in critics' mind.
What about the expanding the governor's power to balance the budget during fiscal emergencies? Now, some people say this is, giving him too much power. Is that really critical?
It's not going to create a king in the governor's office. What this says is that when the governor declares a fiscal emergency, something happens a lot in California, the legislature has to respond. It doesn't say the legislature what they have to do. They just have to respond. They have to do something, or the governor gets the unilateral power to make cuts. So I don't think
So they don't have to solve the budget crisis or even come up with a budget. They just have to do some sort of
They have to
intent.
address it, and the legislature gets to decide what addressing is. So I think what this will do is sort of spur Sacramento to action rather than shifting power dramatically to the executive branch.
But this measure would also allow counties to customize state regulations. Tell us about that.
Well, this measure creates community action plans where different local governments can get together and say, here are our goals, and here are some state laws or regulations that we think get in the way of accomplishing these goals. And it would allow them, unless the state government tells them no, it would allow them to change the way that those state regulations are implemented and sort of make policy that fits their county. So one question is, do you want local governments to have this much control, or should we have uniform state laws in these areas? Another question becomes, which of these areas can be overridden? The proponents say it won't allow a watering down of state environmental laws, that it's just written to apply to state programs that local governments are in charge of implementing. But environmental groups are opposing this measure in large part because they worry that it would allow an erosion of things like the California Environmental Quality Act.
And some critics even say that it would also shift the bureaucracy from Sacramento to county governments. Is there any truth to that?
Well, we've got bureaucracy all over the state in California. We have people who are implementing governments, who are implementing laws, but it would just give more flexibility to local governments in the way they implement things, for better or worse.
Tell us about the organization. They're a non-partisan organization that, or so they say, that actually wrote this proposition.
Yeah, California Forward has been funded by nonprofit foundations, and they're really a bipartisan group that has had a lot of sort of people with a lot of experience in government from both parties have gotten together. They came up with some ideas, and then they went around the state and held lots and lots of public meetings that were well attended to craft these. And they had a big list of reforms they're considering. They narrowed it down to 6 reforms, and that big package of reforms makes up Prop 31.
And their process is sort of chip away at things, right? A little bite at a time.
This is the incremental process. A few years ago, we were talking about burning the Constitution, rewriting it, starting wholly anew. California Forward has been the move slowly, incrementally, make a few changes. Some of them are really inside baseball, like a provision that says every bill needs to be in print for 3 days so we have more sunlight on it. Some of them are major, like PAYGO and the community action plans. But as a sum, that's not rewriting the Constitution, but it would change it significantly.
All right, Thad Kauser, UC San Diego political science professor. We are out of time. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks a lot.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next news hour, the latest on the monster storm in the Northeast, plus gathering information online from Ohio voters. That's Tuesday on the PBS NewsHour.
San Diego Chargers have waived kicker Nate Kading. He's been on injured reserve for a groin injury since late October. Kading passed a physical, and the waiver allows him to go to another team. But if he's not picked up, the Chargers will owe him more than $1 million in termination pay. A bit cooler down at least the next couple of days in San Diego, with increasing clouds and temperatures mostly in the 70s. Here's a look at the forecast. A record 1,062 homeless men, women, and children sought help at this year's Stand Down for military veterans. It started in San Diego 25 years ago, and now more than 200 communities across the country put on a similar event. Organizers say one thing's apparent: more vets from Iraq and Afghanistan are ending up on the streets.
I was there in Desert Storm. I was 20 years old. You know, it's something I'll never forget.
A veteran of the Marine Corps, Arturo overcame physical injuries, nightmares, and life addicted to alcohol with help from the Veterans Village of San Diego. The same folks who put Stand Down on every year, giving homeless vets and even their families much-needed access to medical, legal, and housing assistance.
Went through a lot of flashbacks and nightmares. I had a real hard time trying to sleep. I drank to pass out. Not to have fun, not to get drunk, not to socialize. I drank to pass out.
Today, Arturo is one of the many veterans who've successfully completed the rehab program at VVSD and is now enrolled in college. About 16,000 post-9/11 veterans are expected to call San Diego home in the next decade. And that means a new wave of veterans suffering from PTSD and various addictions will be hitting the shores of San Diego.
Our next goal is to build permanent housing for veterans, which helps to complete a continuum of care, which we start when you first walk in here seeking our assistance.
Phil Landis is a veteran of the Army and Purple Heart recipient. As CEO of the Veterans Village, he envisioned a 5-acre campus 12 years ago to house and counsel vets. And it's finally coming to pass.
Okay, after you.
The latest addition includes a new auditorium where all 165 residents can gather and meet. And upstairs are 12 double occupancy rooms for women or post 9/11 vets. Landis says a third of his clients are 20-something, and he applauds the VA's goal to eliminate homelessness by 2015, but doesn't think it's doable. He says we can learn a lot from past wars and their consequences.
You're going to create a population of men, now men and women, who are disturbed by their experiences. That is not going to stop.
Landis says he believes communities pulling together can solve the problem, and Stand Down is a good example of that. He says it could take some time to find property to build a permanent housing facility for homeless vets, but they're determined to do just that. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.